Picture yourself stepping into a vast stone hall centuries ago, where the air is cool and the light is soft and flickering from a distant fireplace. All around you, covering every wall from floor to ceiling, are immense woven scenes alive with color and motion. Knights riding into battle, mythical beasts roaming enchanted forests, biblical stories unfolding in brilliant detail. These are medieval tapestries, and they are so much more than just wall coverings. They are whispering galleries of history, each thread spun from human creativity, and each image holding secrets waiting to be uncovered. For generations, these spectacular works of art have fascinated not only historians and artists, but everyone lucky enough to stand before them and feel their presence. They draw us into a world where cloth becomes chronicle and craftsmanship becomes legend. In this video, we're going to unravel the creative brilliance behind medieval tapestries and the untold stories they carry across time. We'll explore how these monumental textiles were made, from the shearing of local sheep to the delicate dyeing processes that produced radiant reds, luminous blues, and gold threads that caught the light like heaven itself. We'll meet the weavers who spent years, sometimes decades, bringing these visions to life, row by painstaking row, and we'll decode the symbols hidden in plain sight, the unicorns that stand for purity, the lions that signal courage, the flowers that bloom with secret meanings. This is a journey into the heart of medieval imagination, where art was not just something to look at, but something to live with, to learn from, to believe in, and to carry through life's great halls and humble chambers. From the epic narrative of the Bayeux Tapestry, which documents one of history's most pivotal conquests, to intimate works like The Lady and the Unicorn, which appeal to all the senses and the soul, we'll uncover how these pieces shaped culture, reflected power, and captured the hopes and fears of an entire age. You'll discover why tapestries were among the most valued possessions of kings and clerics, and how they served as both insulation against the cold and inspiration for the spirit. By the end of our exploration, you won't just see medieval art, you'll understand the language it speaks and the legacy it left behind. So come with us into a world woven with wonder, where every thread has a tale, and every tapestry is a masterpiece waiting to share its secrets with you. To truly appreciate the grandeur of medieval tapestries, we must first travel back to their beginnings, long before the great halls of castles were adorned with these masterpieces. The story starts not in the Middle Ages, but in the ancient world. Skilled weavers in Egypt were creating intricate linen textiles thousands of years before the Common Era, and the Greeks and Romans elevated textile arts to new heights, using lavish fabrics as signs of wealth and power in their homes and temples. When the Roman Empire receded, the knowledge and appreciation for these sophisticated textiles didn't vanish. They were preserved and patiently adapted in the emerging cultures of Europe, slowly merging with local artistic traditions. It was during the early medieval period that this craft began to crystallize into the form we recognize today. By the 9th and 10th centuries, regions in northern Europe, particularly in what is now France and Belgium, became epicenters of innovation. In places like Flanders, a perfect storm of resources and ingenuity came together. There was an abundance of high-quality wool from local sheep, and its cities sat at the crossroads of bustling trade routes, granting access to precious materials like silk from the East and dyes from the Mediterranean. Artisans in these hubs began to develop highly specialized techniques, working on massive vertical looms that allowed them to create larger and more detailed compositions than ever before. This wasn't just a craft, it was an emerging art form that required immense skill, patience, and collaboration. But why did tapestries become so immensely popular among the elite? The reasons were both brilliantly practical and deeply symbolic. Imagine a medieval castle, a sprawling stone structure that was notoriously drafty, damp, and difficult to heat. A massive tapestry hanging on a wall didn't just beautify a barren space, it acted as a vital insulator, trapping heat and providing a layer of comfort against the cold. They could also be moved from residence to residence, allowing nobles to bring a sense of familiar splendor wherever they traveled. Yet their function extended far beyond the practical. For the nobility and the church, a tapestry was a powerful declaration of status, wealth, and identity. Commissioning a large, intricate tapestry was an incredibly expensive undertaking, a clear signal of one's immense resources and refined taste. For the church, these woven stories served as a monumental Bible for the illiterate, illustrating sacred narratives and the lives of saints to inspire awe and devotion in congregations. This growing demand fueled the establishment of organized tapestry workshops, especially as Europe moved into the Gothic era of the 12th and 13th centuries. These weren't just simple craft shops, they were sophisticated operations resembling modern design studios. A master weaver would oversee a team of apprentices, often collaborating with artists who created the initial designs known as cartoons. Cities like Arras in France became so famous for their output that the word Arras became a generic term for tapestry across Europe. The early beginnings of these workshops, with their division of labor and pursuit of artistic excellence, laid the essential groundwork. They established the technical standards, artistic conventions, and economic models that would eventually blossom into a true golden age of tapestry weaving, setting the stage for the breathtaking works that would soon capture the imagination of an entire continent. So what exactly went into creating these monumental works of art? Let's step inside the medieval workshop and examine the weaver's toolkit. The foundation of nearly every tapestry was strong, resilient wool, typically sheared from local sheep. This wool provided the sturdy backbone of the textile, but for brilliance and luxury, weavers turned to silk, a precious import that traveled along trade routes from places like China and Byzantium. Silk threads caught the light in a way wool could not, adding shimmering highlights to a saint's robe or the luminous petals of a flower. For the most lavish commissions, meant to proclaim a patron's immense wealth, weavers might even incorporate threads made by wrapping silk around a slender core of silver or gold leaf. The mere presence of these metallic threads was a direct statement of power and opulence, yet these raw materials were just the beginning. The true magic, the alchemy that brought a tapestry to life, happened in the dyeing vats. Creating vibrant, lasting colors was a complex science passed down through generations. To achieve a deep, rich red, dyers used madder root, which had to be harvested at just the right time and carefully processed. For a brilliant blue, they turned to woad, a plant that required a lengthy and rather smelly fermentation process. A bright, sunny yellow came from the weld plant. The most coveted and expensive color was a true scarlet, produced not from a plant but from the crushed bodies of thousands of Kermes insects, which were painstakingly collected from Mediterranean oak trees. To fix these dyes onto the wool and silk and make the colors light-fast, artisans used substances called mordants, most commonly alum. The entire dyeing process was unpredictable and required a deep, almost secret knowledge, making a skilled dyer as valuable as any master weaver. With their palette of brilliantly colored threads prepared, the weavers could begin their work at the loom. two main types of looms were used, the high warp loom and the low warp loom. The high warp or vertical loom was an imposing structure where the threads of the tapestry, called the warp, were stretched taut from top to bottom. The weaver worked from the back of the piece, using their fingers to manually interlace the colored weft threads row by row, constantly referring to the cartoon, a full-scale drawing pinned beneath the warp threads as their guide. This method allowed for tremendous artistic control but was incredibly slow and physically demanding. The low warp loom, by contrast, was a horizontal frame. The weaver sat at this loom, using small shuttles to pass the weft threads through the warp. While potentially faster, it required a different set of skills and often resulted in a slightly finer, tighter weave. The techniques they employed were nothing short of ingenious. To create sharp, clean lines between different color areas, weavers used a method called slit weaving. They would simply stop the weft thread at the edge of one color area, creating a small vertical gap or slit before beginning the adjacent color. These slits were often sewn up later to reinforce the tapestry. To model forms and create the illusion of depth, the folds of a cloak or the roundness of a cheek, they used hachure. This technique involved weaving small, angled dashes of alternating colors side by side, a form of visual blending that tricks the eye into seeing shadows and light. Every single step, from setting up the massive loom to tying off the final thread, was done entirely by hand. The creation of a large tapestry was a marathon of human patience and collaboration, often taking a team of weavers several years to complete a single piece. It was this incredible fusion of material science and artistic skill that transformed simple threads into some of the most enduring and expressive stories ever told. Now that we understand the incredible skill and materials that went into these tapestries, we can begin to read them. And to the medieval viewer, these weren't just pretty pictures. They were a dense, symbolic language, a visual code where every single element was chosen for its deeper meaning. Stepping back to look at one of these vast woven scenes is like learning to read an entire book written in flowers, animals, and colors. This was a world where nothing was merely decorative. Everything was an allegory, a moral lesson, or a political statement waiting to be deciphered. Take the animals that populate these verdant scenes, for instance. Their meanings were often drawn directly from the wildly popular medieval bestiaries, illuminated manuscripts that catalogued creatures both real and mythical, each with a prescribed moral or religious significance. A lion wasn't just a lion. It could symbolize royal power and courage, but due to a peculiar legend that lion cubs were born dead and revived by their father's breath on the third day, it also became a powerful symbol of Christ's resurrection. The unicorn, perhaps the most famous tapestry beast, was a complex symbol of purity and grace. Its legend said it could only be captured by a virgin, making it a clear allegory for the incarnation, Christ being captured by the Virgin Mary. In the famous Hunt of the Unicorn series, the pursuit, capture, and eventual resurrection of the unicorn is a rich, multi-layered narrative about love, death, and ultimately Christian redemption. Even the tiniest flower in the background, part of what's known as a millefleur or thousand flowers tapestry style, was loaded with meaning informed by the herbal lore of the time. A lily almost always symbolized purity and was associated with the Virgin Mary. The strawberry, with its three-part leaf and red fruit, was a symbol of the Holy Trinity or of righteous behavior, its fruit representing the fruits of good deeds. Irises could denote the sorrows of the Virgin, while columbines were associated with the Holy Spirit. This created a deeply layered viewing experience. A noblewoman walking past a tapestry could read a story of courtly love in the central figures, while simultaneously contemplating a spiritual lesson woven into the very ground they stood upon. Color itself was a language, and the hues painstakingly achieved by master dyers spoke volumes. Red, particularly the deep scarlet from expensive Kermes dye, was a color of dual meaning. It could represent love, passion, and worldly power, but it also signified the blood of Christian martyrs, sacrifice, and the burning fire of the Holy Spirit. Blue, derived from precious ultramarine or more common woad, was the color of heaven, truth, and divinity, often used for the robes of the Virgin Mary. Green symbolized fertility, spring, and the renewal of life, but it could also carry a negative connotation, hinting at greed or deceit. The use of these colors was a deliberate choice, adding another subtextual layer to the narrative unfolding in the threads. Beyond the central action, the borders of these tapestries often held their own miniature worlds of symbolism. These frames were not merely decorative edges, they were integral to the story. They might be filled with intricate foliage, heraldic shields, or amusing scenes of everyday life known as drolleries. A monkey playing a lute, a fox preaching to geese, a mermaid holding a mirror. These border elements weren't random. They could provide commentary on the main scene, offering a moral contrast or a moment of comic relief. They could display the patron's coat of arms, asserting their identity and ownership of the narrative. Or they could simply expand the tapestry's symbolic universe, creating a rich, immersive frame that encouraged the viewer's eye to wander and discover new details with every look. This transformed the act of viewing into an active exploration, a visual treasure hunt for hidden meanings. And that symbolic language finds its most epic and direct expression in the single most famous work of its kind, a monumental embroidery that has captivated the world for centuries, the Bayeux Tapestry. While we call it a tapestry, it's technically a masterpiece of embroidery, an immense strip of linen cloth nearly 70 meters long, painstakingly stitched with woolen thread in just 8 different colors. But its name is the least of its complexities. This is not a decorative piece. It is a breathtakingly ambitious historical chronicle, a political statement, and a gripping piece of propaganda, all woven into one continuous cinematic narrative. It tells the story of one of history's most pivotal moments, the Norman conquest of England in 1066, culminating in the Battle of Hastings. The story it tells is from the Norman perspective, and it begins a few years before the invasion. We see Earl Harold Godwinson, the most powerful man in England, journeying to Normandy. The narrative suggests he was sent by the dying King Edward the Confessor to confirm William, Duke of Normandy, as the rightful heir to the English throne. In a crucial and heavily debated scene, Harold is depicted swearing an oath of allegiance to William over a pair of reliquaries, sacred boxes that would have made the oath unbreakable in the eyes of God and man. This moment is the entire moral and legal foundation of the tapestry's argument. When Harold returns to England and takes the crown for himself after Edward's death, the tapestry portrays him not as a rightful king, but as an oath-breaker, a usurper whose perjury justifies William's righteous invasion. The artistry of the storytelling is astonishing. It unfolds like a medieval graphic novel or a sweeping film scroll, using a clever combination of images and Latin inscriptions to guide the viewer. The creators used a variety of stitching techniques to add texture and life outline stitch for the figures, couching stitch to fill large areas with color, and clever changes in the direction of the threads to model forms and suggest movement. But the narrative is more than just historical record. It is infused with portents and divine commentary. One of the most dramatic and famous scenes shows a group of terrified Anglo-Saxons pointing up at a star with a flaming tail in the sky. This is Halley's Comet, which appeared in 1066. To the medieval mind, comets were never good news. They were omens of disaster and upheaval. Here, the tapestry masterfully uses this celestial event not just as a recorded fact, but as a narrative device, a sign from God that Harold's reign is illegitimate and that divine punishment is coming from across the channel. The tapestry's climax is the brutal, chaotic battle of Hastings itself, depicted with a raw, visceral energy that still feels immediate. We see the Norman cavalry with their chainmail hauberks and distinctive conical helmets crashing into the Anglo-Saxon shield wall. We see the grisly reality of medieval combat, horses stumbling, men being dismembered, and the battlefield littered with the dead. The most iconic and analyzed scene of all is the death of King Harold. The Latin inscription above simply states Harold Rex Interfectus Est. Here King Harold has been killed, but the image is wonderfully ambiguous. One figure has an arrow striking his eye, while another is being cut down by a Norman knight on horseback. For generations, this was interpreted as a two-part depiction of Harold first being shot in the eye with an arrow, and then finished off with a sword. Modern scholarship suggests it might show two different moments or even two different men, but the power of the image as a symbol of a dynasty's end is undeniable. This incredible work was almost certainly commissioned by someone within William the Conqueror's inner circle, likely his half-brother, Bishop Odo of Bayeux, who appears prominently in the tapestry as a rallying figure during the battle. Its purpose was clear: to legitimize Norman rule for a largely illiterate population by presenting a compelling, visually spectacular story of broken oaths and divine justice. It was a tool to justify a violent takeover, yet for all its clear bias, it is an invaluable historical document. It provides an unparalleled window into the 11th century, showing us the design of Viking-style ships that carried the Normans, the intricate construction of motte and bailey castles built after the invasion, the weapons and armor used in battle, and even details of daily life like feasting and farming. The debates around its origins, where it was made, exactly by whom, and even where it was first displayed only add to its enduring mystery. The Bayeux tapestry stands alone, a monumental achievement that transcends its role as propaganda to become a timeless story of ambition, conflict, and the relentless shaping of history. While the Bayeux tapestry captured the drama of earthly power, another profound purpose for these monumental weavings was unfolding within the walls of churches and monasteries across Europe. Here, tapestries transcended art to become true windows to the divine, transforming cold stone naves into vibrant, immersive Bibles for the faithful. In an age where literacy was a privilege of the clergy and nobility, these immense textiles served a vital evangelical purpose. They made the complex stories of Scripture, the harrowing trials of martyrs, and the awe-inspiring visions of prophets accessible to everyone, translating the written word into a universal language of color, symbol, and form that could stir the soul and strengthen belief. Perhaps no work exemplifies this dramatic, spiritual ambition more than the Apocalypse Tapestry, commissioned in the 14th century by Louis I, Duke of Anjou. Inspired by a manuscript of the Book of Revelation, the original tapestry was a staggering achievement, measuring an almost unimaginable 140 meters in length. It brought the apocalyptic visions of St. John the Divine to life with a visceral intensity meant to both terrify and inspire. Viewers would have been surrounded by scenes of the four horsemen unleashing famine and war, multi-headed beasts rising from the sea, and angels battling demonic forces. This was not passive decoration, it was a powerful, emotional sermon in thread. The tapestry's overwhelming scale and vivid imagery made the abstract concepts of divine judgment, the end of days, and the hope of salvation feel immediate and real, serving as a constant reminder of the eternal consequences of one's earthly life. The creation of such a masterpiece was never a purely spiritual endeavor. It was also a transaction between the earthly and the divine, a fact proudly woven into the fabric itself. Wealthy patrons, whether noble families or high-ranking church officials, frequently had their own portraits and coats of arms incorporated into these sacred scenes. You might see the Duke who funded the tapestry kneeling humbly at the foot of the cross, or his heraldic symbols, lions, eagles, or intricate geometric patterns adorning the borders of a scene depicting the Last Supper. This was more than vanity. It was a declaration of piety, a very public and permanent demonstration of their devotion and their role as benefactors of the Church. It created a fascinating blend of the sacred and the secular, reminding the congregation that their access to this divine art was made possible by the power and generosity of their earthly ruler, seamlessly weaving together spiritual authority and temporal power. To further elevate these scenes from the earthly to the heavenly, weavers employed their most precious materials, threads of gold and silver. Wrapping silk around slender strands of these precious metals, they could create effects that were quite literally luminous. In the dim, flickering light of a cathedral, lit only by candles and stained glass windows, these metallic threads would catch and reflect the light, making halos glow with an unearthly radiance, angelic robes shimmer, and heavenly cities appear to be built from light itself. This technical marvel was deeply symbolic. The shimmering gold was a direct representation of the divine light of heaven, a visual metaphor for the glory of God that no paint or pigment could replicate. It transformed the tapestry from a mere depiction of a holy scene into an active participant in the sacred atmosphere of the space, enhancing the mystical experience of worship and inspiring a sense of wonder and transcendence. These religious tapestries were, therefore, far more than background adornment. They were active, dynamic tools of faith, a catechism in wool and silk, a sermon that never ended. They educated, they inspired awe, they warned of sin, and they offered the hope of redemption, all while serving the pragmatic needs of their patrons. They prepared the medieval mind, so attuned to symbol and spectacle, for the spiritual journey, creating a bridge between the daily struggles of life and the profound mysteries of the divine. This deep interweaving of belief and artistry set a powerful precedent, demonstrating the narrative power of the medium and paving the way for weavers and patrons to soon turn their looms toward the splendid dramas of courtly love, heroic legend, and the rhythms of everyday life. But the walls of cathedrals and the minds of medieval people were not occupied by faith alone. As the Middle Ages progressed, a new world of secular interests and aristocratic leisure began to demand its own artistic expression on the loom. Stepping away from purely religious themes, weavers and their patrons turned their attention to the splendid dramas of the here and now, to the thrill of the hunt, the idealized rituals of courtly love, and the lively spectacle of daily life. These secular tapestries became a vibrant canvas for the nobility to project their aspirations, their wealth, and their very identity, transforming their great halls into theaters of power and pleasure. Among the most celebrated of these works is the exquisite series known as The Lady and the Unicorn. Woven in Flanders around the year 1500, these 6 tapestries are a masterpiece of allegorical storytelling that feels both intimate and universal. Each of the first 5 is devoted to one of the 5 senses, a popular theme that allowed for immense creativity. In Taste, we see the elegant lady taking a sweet from a dish offered by a maidservant, while a parrot and a monkey, symbols of gluttony and mimicry, observe. In Touch, she gently grasps the unicorn's horn with one hand and a banner with the other, her composure absolute. The depiction of Sight is particularly poignant, with the lady seated, holding a mirror as the unicorn rests its forelegs on her lap, gazing at its own reflection, a beautiful metaphor for self-awareness and vanity. The series culminates in a mysterious sixth tapestry inscribed "A mon seul désir," to my only desire. Here, the lady places a necklace into a jeweled chest, a gesture often interpreted as a renunciation of the physical senses for a higher, spiritual or moral love. The entire cycle is set against a deep red background teeming with life, the famous millefleur field of 1,000 flowers, each botanically accurate, alongside countless rabbits, birds, and other creatures. This creates a mesmerizing, enclosed world that is at once a garden of earthly delights and a sophisticated puzzle about the human experience. Beyond such original allegories, the secular tapestry was also a powerful medium for adapting popular literature, bringing the epic tales everyone knew from hearing them recited into breathtaking visual form. Great cycles of tapestries were woven depicting scenes from the chivalric romances of Chrétien de Troyes, immortalizing the adventures of King Arthur, Lancelot, and the quest for the Holy Grail. Others drew from classical antiquity, illustrating the heroic deeds of Alexander the Great or the tragic love story of Pyramus and Thisbe. For an aristocratic audience, these were more than just decorations. They were a form of prestige entertainment. A lord could host a feast and literally have his guests dining within the legend of Tristan and Isolde, the woven scenes providing a magnificent backdrop for conversation and reinforcing the patron's own cultured status and connection to these timeless ideals of heroism and romance. Perhaps most valuable to us today, however, are the glimpses these textiles offer into the rhythms and structures of medieval society itself. Scenes of the hunt are not just about the pursuit of a deer or a boar. They are detailed records of a quintessential aristocratic pastime, showing the specific breeds of hunting dogs, the types of saddles and weapons used, and the complex social rituals that govern the sport. Tapestries depicting feasts provide a catalogue of medieval material culture, the design of drinking vessels, the cut of fashionable clothing, the arrangement of musical instruments for entertainment. Some even show the very process of their own creation, depicting women at smaller looms or embroidering, offering a rare acknowledgement of the often female labor that went into such arts. These everyday scenes, woven with the same care as any religious martyrdom, reveal the fabric of medieval life, its hierarchies, its pleasures, and the subtle ways social roles and gender expectations were performed and reinforced within the walls of a castle. In choosing to immortalize these secular moments, patrons were weaving their own worldviews, their values, and their identities directly into the art that surrounded them, creating a legacy that was as much about earthly glory as it was about heavenly salvation. Behind every magnificent tapestry was a patron, a powerful individual or institution whose wealth and ambition fueled this extraordinary art form. To understand these works fully, we must step into the glittering courts and powerful cloisters of medieval Europe, where art was never created for its own sake, but as a deliberate instrument of influence. Commissioning a tapestry was a profound act of patronage, a transaction where immense financial resources were exchanged for cultural capital, political legitimacy, and a permanent claim on history. Kings and queens, powerful dukes, influential bishops, and eventually wealthy merchants all recognized that a loom could weave more than just images. It could weave power, prestige, and propaganda into a single, spectacular statement. Consider the court of Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, in the 15th century. His realm was a center of immense wealth and refined taste, and Philip himself was perhaps the most extravagant patron of tapestries the world had ever seen. For him, these textiles were essential tools of statecraft. He maintained a personal collection of over 100 pieces, an inventory of breathtaking value. When he traveled, his tapestries traveled with him, turning any drafty castle or temporary pavilion into a mobile throne room that screamed Burgundian power. They were his preferred diplomatic weapon. Gifting a luxurious tapestry to a fellow ruler or a potential ally was an act of immense calculated generosity. It was a display of his boundless resources, his sophisticated culture, and a subtle reminder of the debt now owed. The imagery he chose was never accidental. Scenes of his own military victories, his illustrious ancestry, or the heroic deeds of classical heroes all served a single purpose: to visually argue for the legitimacy, nobility, and unchallengeable authority of the House of Burgundy. The economic impact of this lavish patronage rippled through entire regions. A single commission from a duke like Philip could sustain a large workshop designers, cartoonists, dyers, weavers, and merchants for years. Cities like Arras, Tournai, and later Brussels became thriving industrial hubs, their economies deeply intertwined with the tapestry trade. This steady demand from the highest levels of society didn't just support existing techniques, it actively fostered innovation. Patrons competed with each other to own the most dazzling, technically audacious pieces, pushing workshops to develop more intricate weaving methods, source more exotic dyes, and create ever more complex and ambitious designs. This cycle of patronage and innovation elevated tapestry from a skilled craft to a premier art form, but it also rigidly reinforced the social order. The scenes woven into these expensive commissions consistently glorified the existing hierarchy, depicting the nobility as heroic, pious, and born to rule, while the peasantry and merchant classes, if they appeared at all, were shown in supporting, often idealized roles, content in their place. This leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of these artworks: their portability. Unlike a fresco painted directly onto a wall, a tapestry was a mobile asset. This wasn't just a practical convenience, it was a strategic advantage. A king could have them packed up and transported to a border castle to impress a visiting dignitary, or loaded onto wagons and carried to the front lines of a military campaign. Imagine the scene: a vast command tent on the eve of a battle, its interior lined with woven scenes of ancient military triumphs or the patron saint of victory. For the soldiers and commanders inside, this was more than decoration. It was a powerful psychological tool, a visual sermon on their own inevitable success and the divine right of their cause. In times of peace, they defined the space for grand ceremonies, coronations, weddings, treaty signings. The tapestries chosen for such an event would be meticulously selected to broadcast a specific message, whether it was the piety of the host, the legitimacy of a dynastic union, or the overwhelming power of the crown. Through this system of patronage, we see the complete interconnectedness of medieval society. The Church used tapestries to inspire faith and assert its spiritual authority. The nobility used them to cement their social and political power, crafting a visual mythology of their own greatness. The economic engine of their commissions supported urban centers and drove artistic progress. And the artworks themselves, as movable, multi-purpose tools, became active participants in the theater of power. They were not passive reflections of their time, but dynamic instruments used to shape perception, command loyalty, and write a version of history in wool and silk that would endure for centuries. This complex relationship between the patron, the purse, and the artisan reveals that every thread in a medieval tapestry is spun not just with dyed wool, but with ambition, ideology, and the relentless human desire to be remembered. And it is within this world of secular splendor and aristocratic self-fashioning that we encounter one of the most mesmerizing and mysterious creations to ever emerge from a medieval loom: the unicorn tapestries. This series of 7 works, likely woven in the South Netherlands around the turn of the 16th century, draws us into an enchanted forest where a beautifully rendered white unicorn is pursued, captured, and ultimately resurrected. But to view these pieces as a simple narrative of a hunt is to miss their profound depth. They are a layered allegory, a complex visual poem that has sparked centuries of debate and interpretation, its true meaning as elusive and magical as the mythical beast at its heart. One of the most enduring and powerful interpretations views the entire cycle through a deeply religious lens, seeing the unicorn as a potent symbol of Christ. In this reading, the hunt represents the passion of Christ. The hunters and their hounds become the forces of persecution, pursuing an innocent and pure being. The moment of capture, where the unicorn is speared and subdued, is a direct parallel to the crucifixion. This symbolism is powerfully reinforced in the famous panel often called the unicorn in captivity, where the animal is shown alive and well, tethered to a pomegranate tree within a small fence. Here, the wounds from the hunt are visible but seem insignificant, and the unicorn appears serene and content. This is not a scene of imprisonment but of resurrection and redemption. The pomegranates, a long-standing symbol of fertility and eternal life in Christian art, along with the blooming garden, suggest Christ's triumph over death and the promise of salvation. The fence itself might represent the garden of the church, a protected space for the faithful, yet not every scholar is convinced this is a purely religious tale. An equally compelling theory posits that the tapestries are a sophisticated allegory of courtly love and, more specifically, marital fidelity. In medieval literature, the unicorn could symbolize a devoted lover, and its legendary capture by a virgin was a common metaphor for the taming of a wild heart by virtuous love. The entire hunt, then, becomes a symbolic courtship. The elegant noblemen and ladies present throughout the scenes are not mere spectators, they are central to this secular drama. The final image of the unicorn, tethered and content, could represent the joyful surrender and binding commitment of marriage. The lush, enclosed garden filled with ripe fruits and fertile plants strongly supports this reading, as such hortus conclusus imagery was frequently associated with female virtue and the sanctity of marriage. This interpretation transforms the series from a story of persecution into a celebration of love, desire, and the civilized bonds of matrimony. Regardless of which meaning one leans toward, the sheer artistic brilliance of the work is undeniable. Every square inch of these tapestries is alive with meticulously rendered detail, set against the breathtaking millefleur or thousand flowers background. This is not a generic green blur, it is a botanist's delight, featuring hundreds of identifiable species like daisies, thistles, bluebells, and violets, all flowering simultaneously in a state of perpetual spring. This impossible garden creates a timeless, dreamlike world, but it also serves a symbolic purpose. Many of these plants were known from medieval herbal manuals to have specific properties, some for healing, some for protection, some associated with love or death. This suggests the designers possessed a deep knowledge of the natural world and its allegorical language, weaving a secondary layer of meaning into the very ground the figures walk upon. The influence of artistic trends from the Low Countries is also evident in the realistic depiction of the animals, from the expressive hunting dogs to the various birds and monkeys scattered throughout the scene, each adding to the tapestry's vibrant, teeming sense of life. All this beauty is wrapped in enduring mystery. We do not know for certain who commissioned these magnificent works or exactly which workshop created them. Their survival itself is something of a miracle. They were rediscovered in the 19th century, languishing in a dusty storage room in a French chateau, where they were being used to insulate potatoes from the frost. This near loss only adds to their aura, making them feel like a precious secret whispered down through the centuries. The unicorn tapestries stand as the ultimate embodiment of medieval artistic spirit, a breathtaking fusion of technical mastery, naturalistic observation, and profound symbolic depth. They refuse to offer a single, easy answer, instead inviting each viewer into a personal dialogue with the past, to wander through their flowering fields and decide for themselves what truth this magical, captured beast is meant to hold. Yet for all the quiet skill of the weaver in her convent or the gentlewoman at her embroidery frame, the story of women and tapestry is not confined to the workshop. Some of the most powerful women in Europe used these magnificent textiles as tools of statecraft, personal expression, and dynastic legacy, asserting their influence and intellect in a world dominated by men. Helena of Aquitaine, one of the most formidable figures of the 12th century, was not only a queen of France and later England, but also a legendary patron of the arts. While no tapestries can be definitively traced to her personal commission, her court was a renowned center of cultural innovation, deeply influencing the chivalric romances and literary themes that would become standard subject matter for tapestry designers for centuries to come. She shaped the very stories that were told on the loom. Moving forward in time, we find a patron whose impact is far more documented, Margaret of Austria. As the regent of the Netherlands in the early 16th century, Margaret was a masterful ruler and one of the greatest art collectors of the Renaissance. Her court at Mechelen was a dazzling hub of artistic production, and she maintained a deep, personal interest in the tapestry workshops of the Low Countries. She understood the power of these objects as diplomatic instruments and as reflections of her own sophisticated taste and authority. Margaret commissioned and collected tapestries that depicted historical and allegorical themes, using them to decorate her palaces and to impress foreign ambassadors. Her patronage was a very public demonstration that the creation of beauty and the wielding of political power were not mutually exclusive pursuits, but could be seamlessly woven together by a discerning and intelligent woman. Beyond patronage, the very subjects woven into these textiles often provided a space to explore and define ideals of womanhood. Many tapestries feature powerful female protagonists from the Bible, like Judith bravely defeating Holofernes, or from classical history and mythology, such as the virtuous Lucretia. Perhaps even more telling are the countless allegorical figures personifying abstract virtues: charity, justice, fortitude, and chastity, who are almost universally depicted as noble, serene women. These images served a dual purpose. For the male viewer, they presented an idealized model of female behavior to be admired. For the women who lived among these tapestries, they offered a reflection of themselves cast in a heroic, monumental light. They could look upon the figure of fortitude holding her pillar and see not just a vague ideal, but a representation of the inner strength they were expected to cultivate in their own lives, managing households, navigating court politics, and enduring the perils of childbirth. Perhaps the most personal and poignant use of tapestry by women was in the context of marriage. A magnificent tapestry was a common and incredibly valuable part of a noblewoman's dowry, often commissioned specifically to commemorate the union. These works would frequently incorporate the coats of arms of both the bride and groom's families, literally weaving the two lineages together into a new, shared identity. They might also feature themes of romantic love, fidelity, and fruitful union, as seen in the enigmatic Amon Sul Dacier panel of the Lady and the Unicorn, which some interpret as a representation of the lady accepting the bonds of marriage. For a young woman leaving her home to enter a new and often unfamiliar court, such a tapestry was more than a decorative object. It was a piece of her identity, a reminder of her lineage, and a hopeful narrative of the life she was about to begin. In this way, women were not just passive subjects or silent laborers in the world of medieval tapestry. They were active participants as creators, as commissioners, and as an integral part of the audience. Their hands guided the needles and the shuttles, their minds influenced the choice of stories, and their lives were reflected in the very threads that have endured for centuries, adding a rich and essential thread to the fabric of this incredible artistic tradition. But these tapestries offer us so much more than just a record of objects and events. They provide a priceless window into the very soul of the Middle Ages, capturing the collective dreams, fears, and worldview of an entire era in vivid color and thread. Think of them not as simple illustrations, but as complex historical documents, visual archives that preserve intimate details of daily life and belief that written chronicles, often focused on kings and battles, simply overlooked. They freeze moments in time, offering us a tangible connection to the medieval mind that is both immediate and deeply human. Consider the incredible level of practical detail they preserve. For historians studying medieval architecture, tapestries are a treasure trove. They don't just show castles as imposing silhouettes. They reveal the specific design of wooden fortifications, the construction of stone keeps, and the layout of interior spaces like great halls and chapels, complete with furniture, tapestries hanging on the walls, and even the patterns of floor tiles. When it comes to fashion, these textiles are an unparalleled catalogue. We can see the exact cut of a 14th century noblewoman's gown, the drape of her sleeves, the intricate weaving of her belt, and the style of her headdress. We see the functional, padded tunics worn by archers and the elaborate, heraldic surcoats of knights, details that help us understand not just aesthetics but also social stratification and the development of textile technology itself. The same is true for technology and customs. A hunting scene is far more than a simple pastime. It's a detailed manual on medieval forestry and weaponry. We can observe the different types of bows and crossbows used, the specific breeds of hunting dogs employed for different game, and the complex rituals of the hunt that reinforced aristocratic identity. Scenes of feasting show us the arrangement of a high table, the design of drinking vessels, and the musical instruments that provided entertainment, from harps to early forms of the fiddle. Even agricultural tapestries depict the tools and methods used for planting and harvest, offering a glimpse into the lives of the vast majority of the population whose stories were rarely deemed worthy of written record. Beyond these physical details, tapestries are perhaps our best resource for understanding the psychological and spiritual landscape of the time. They are profound reflections of contemporary anxieties and aspirations. The terrifying and magnificent Apocalypse tapestry, for instance, gives physical form to the deep-seated medieval fear of divine judgment and the end of the world, a constant concern in an era plagued by war, famine, and plague. Conversely, the idealized scenes of perfect gardens and graceful courtly love in works like The Lady and the Unicorn represent a collective aspiration, a dream of harmony, order, and refined behavior that stood in stark contrast to the often harsh realities of life. They show us what people valued, what they feared, and what they hoped for. Of course, historians must approach these visual records with a critical eye. A tapestry is never an impartial photograph. It is a carefully constructed narrative, often commissioned by the victorious side in a conflict or by a patron seeking to glorify their own lineage. The Bayeux Tapestry is a masterwork of Norman propaganda, presenting their conquest of England as a justified crusade against an oath-breaker. The idyllic scenes of peasant life were typically commissioned by and for the nobility, presenting an idealized, peaceful version of the social order that benefited them. The artistic license taken by weavers compressing time, combining events, or using symbolic rather than realistic colors means we cannot always take every detail at face value. The challenge for modern scholars is to peel back these layers of bias and artistic convention to find the kernels of historical truth within, using these magnificent works to complement and sometimes challenge the stories told by parchments and stone. In doing so, we come to see these tapestries for what they truly are, not just beautiful artworks but active participants in history, shaping and reflecting the complex world that created them. Stepping back to take in a grand medieval tapestry is like watching an epic film unfold across a single, magnificent screen. These artists didn't have separate panels or frames. They worked on a continuous field, guiding the viewer on a visual journey through time and space using a brilliant set of narrative techniques. One of the most common and effective methods was a style known as continuous narration. The story progresses in a flowing sequence, with the same characters appearing multiple times within the same woven scene as they move through different moments of the tale. It's very much like a modern comic strip where you follow a character from one action to the next, but here the transitions are seamless, woven into a single, unified composition. Your eye is meant to wander and discover the plot, finding the beginning, middle, and end as you travel across the textile. To ensure the viewer could always follow who was who in this flowing narrative, weavers employed clever tricks of consistency and repetition. A key figure like a king or a saint would be dressed in the same distinctive, brightly colored garments throughout the entire tapestry, making them instantly recognizable as they moved from one event to the next. This is especially clear in a work like the Bayeux Tapestry, where you can easily pick out Harold Godwinson or William the Conqueror in the crowd because their appearance remains constant. Another fascinating convention used for clarity is called isoscelism, which literally means heads at the same level. Even when characters are mounted on horseback, standing, or sitting, their heads are often aligned along an invisible horizontal line. This technique creates a sense of order and makes the crowded scenes much easier to read, preventing the composition from becoming a chaotic jumble and ensuring every figure plays their part in the story. The weavers also used the environment itself as a storytelling tool. Instead of hard cuts or black lines to separate scenes, they would use a tree, a building, a gentle hill, or even a change in the background pattern to signal that the action was moving to a new location or a new moment in time. A castle on one side of the tapestry might represent the start of a journey, while a different fortress on the other side shows the destination. This use of landscape and architecture to denote scene changes is both beautiful and practical, allowing the narrative to flow without ever breaking the overall visual harmony of the piece. The effect is immersive. You feel you are walking through the story itself, passing from a forest into a battlefield and then into a royal court without ever hitting a narrative wall. When we compare this to other great storytelling mediums of the Middle Ages, the unique power of tapestry becomes even clearer. Stained glass windows in cathedrals also told sequential biblical stories, but they were broken into distinct panels by the lead cane that held the glass. Illuminated manuscripts could depict narratives page by page, but their scale was intimate, designed for a single reader or a small group. The tapestry's sheer size is what sets it apart. Imagine a narrative that isn't just something you look at, but something you can literally walk alongside. A story that can surround you in a great hall, measuring dozens of meters long and towering over everyone in the room. This monumental scale, combined with the rich textural quality of the woven wool and silk, added a dramatic, physical presence that a flat painting or a window simply could not match. It was a story you could feel in the room with you. The ultimate challenge for these master artisans was balancing two equally important goals: narrative coherence and aesthetic beauty. The story had to be clear and easy to follow, but it also had to be a stunning work of art. a designer couldn't let the need to show every step of a battle ruin the overall symmetry and color balance of the composition. They solved this by weaving decorative borders that framed the action, filling them with symbolic animals, flowers, or mythological creatures that commented on the main story without disrupting it. They used color harmonies to tie different scenes together visually, and they arranged figures in graceful, rhythmic patterns that pleased the eye even as they advanced the plot. This incredible balancing act resulted in works that were not just simple illustrations, but sophisticated visual arguments and immersive experiences. In a world where most people could not read, these tapestries were more than decoration. They were a primary medium for sharing history, myth, and moral lessons, using a universal language of image and symbol that could be understood by all, making them among the most powerful tools for communication and memory their world had ever known. But all of this storytelling and symbolic power would have been impossible without a vibrant, lasting palette of colors, and achieving those hues was nothing short of alchemy. The medieval dyer's workshop was a place of mystery, science, and sometimes foul odors, where the raw stuff of the earth was transformed into a breathtaking spectrum through processes that were often closely guarded secrets. The quest for color began not in a laboratory, but in forests, fields, and distant oceans, with each shade demanding its own unique and painstaking journey from source to sublime thread. For the most coveted and expensive color of all, true scarlet red, the source was astonishingly small. It came from the kermes insect, a tiny scale insect that lived on the branches of specific oak trees, primarily in the Mediterranean region. Harvesting these insects was a labor-intensive process, as thousands upon thousands had to be carefully collected by hand. The dye itself was derived not from the insect's body, but from its dried eggs, which were then crushed into a fine powder. When processed in a dye vat, this powder produced a stunning, deep, and incredibly color-fast scarlet that no plant-based red could match. Its incredible cost, ounce for ounce often more expensive than gold, meant that kermes scarlet was a color of immense status, reserved for the most luxurious tapestries commissioned by the wealthiest patrons, instantly signaling their power and opulence to any viewer. Another legendary luxury hue was Tyrian purple, a color so historically significant it was named for the ancient Phoenician city of Tyre. This legendary dye was extracted from the mucus glands of several species of sea snails found in the Mediterranean. The process was notoriously difficult and revolting. The mollusks had to be harvested by the thousands, crushed, and then left to putrefy in the sun to release the precious dye precursor. The resulting smell was said to be so foul that dye works were always located downwind of cities, but the color it produced, a rich, deep purple that could range from a reddish burgundy to a dark violet, was deemed worth the effort and the stench. In the ancient world, it was the color of Roman emperors, and in the medieval period, it retained its association with ultimate authority and sanctity, frequently used in tapestries for the robes of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and high-ranking clergy to denote their divine connection and supreme status. For more accessible but still vital colors, dyers turned to the plant kingdom. A brilliant, sunny yellow was obtained from the weld plant, while a deep blue came from the leaves of the woad plant. Woad was particularly important as a European source of blue, though its processing was a complex affair. The leaves were harvested, dried, and ground into a powder, which was then moistened and allowed to ferment for weeks in a process that produced a strong ammonia-like odor. This fermented mass was then mixed with urine to create a dye vat. While less expensive than ultramarine blue made from crushed lapis lazuli stones imported from Afghanistan, a good woad blue was still a valuable and essential color in any dyer's repertoire, used for everything from the Virgin's robes to the backgrounds of secular hunting scenes. The magic of turning these extracted colors into permanent dyes that would bind to wool and silk fibers was achieved through the use of a mordant, most commonly alum. This mineral salt, often imported from the Middle East or mined in Italy, acted as a molecular bridge. The dyer would first treat the yarn with a mordant solution, which prepared the fibers to accept and lock in the dye particles during the subsequent immersion in the dye bath. The choice of mordant could even alter the final color. Iron could sadden or darken hues, while tin could produce brighter, more intense shades. The entire dyeing process was a delicate balancing act of heat, timing, and pH levels, a chemical dance passed down through generations of artisans who understood their craft through experience and observation rather than formal science. The economic and environmental factors were immense. A bad harvest of woad or a disruption in the trade routes for kermes or alum could bring tapestry production in an entire city to a grinding halt, making the dyer one of the most crucial and secretive links in the entire creative chain. And these colors did far more than just beautify. They spoke a silent language that every medieval viewer understood. The scarlet from the kermes insect wasn't just a rich red, it pulsed with multiple meanings. It could symbolize the burning passion of romantic love, the raw power of earthly kings, or the sacred blood of Christian martyrs, all depending on its context within the woven scene. The lush greens derived from plants like weld mixed with woad represented the fertility of spring and the renewal of life, making them perfect for verdant garden scenes and millefleur backgrounds. But green could also carry a negative connotation, hinting at greed, deception, or the unpredictability of nature. A deep, solid black, achieved through multiple dippings in dyes made from oak galls or other tannin-rich sources, was unmistakably the color of mourning, penance, and sometimes evil. The master weavers and the patrons who guided them chose these colors with immense care, knowing that the emotional and narrative weight of the entire tapestry hinged on this vibrant, symbolic language. The dyer's art was therefore the essential first step in the alchemy of storytelling, transforming simple threads into the very building blocks of emotion, status, and sacred meaning that would resonate from the castle walls for centuries to come. Yet for all their grandeur and seeming permanence, these magnificent tapestries are surprisingly fragile objects, caught in a constant, silent battle against time. The very materials that gave them life, the organic wool, the delicate silk, the precious metal-wrapped threads, are also their greatest vulnerability. These fibers are under ceaseless attack from a host of enemies, both seen and unseen. Prolonged exposure to light, especially the ultraviolet rays from the sun or even harsh artificial lighting, will cause the most vibrant dyes to fade and the very fibers to become brittle and weak. Fluctuations in humidity are another silent killer. Too much moisture encourages mold growth and attracts destructive insects like wool-eating moths and carpet beetles, while an environment that is too dry can cause the threads to become desiccated and snap under their own weight. Then there is the simple wear and tear of centuries, the stress of hanging on a wall, the accumulation of dust and grime that weighs down the fibers, and the inevitable fraying and weakening that comes with age. To combat these relentless forces, a specialized field of conservation has developed, dedicated solely to the preservation of these textile treasures. The first and most crucial line of defense is a meticulously controlled environment. In museums like the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York or the Cluny Museum in Paris, home to the iconic Lady and the Unicorn series, tapestries are displayed and stored under strictly regulated conditions. Sophisticated climate control systems maintain a constant, cool temperature and a stable level of humidity, creating a kind of eternal spring that puts the least amount of stress on the ancient fibers. Light levels are kept deliberately low, with special filters on display cases and windows to block harmful ultraviolet rays, ensuring that the brilliant blues from woad and the rich reds from Kerm's insects can be seen by visitors today without sacrificing their visibility for generations to come. When a tapestry requires more direct intervention, the process is a painstaking exercise in patience and precision, more akin to microsurgery than simple cleaning. Conservators work on enormous custom-designed tables, gently vacuuming the surface with soft brushes and low suction to remove centuries of embedded dust. For more thorough cleaning, they might use specialized sponges that absorb grime without introducing moisture, or in rare cases, employ delicate aqueous cleaning techniques where the tapestry is carefully bathed in purified water to slowly draw out acidic soils. One of the most common and vital conservation procedures is providing structural support. Over time, the vertical warp threads that form the backbone of the tapestry can become strained and broken. To address this, conservators often add a supportive backing, a nearly invisible layer of stable, neutral-colored fabric that is stitched to the original tapestry with thousands of tiny hand-sewn stitches. This new layer doesn't bear the weight itself. Instead, it acts like a supportive net, distributing the stress of hanging across a much broader area and allowing the fragile original threads to rest. This backing is always applied using reversible techniques, ensuring that no action taken today will prevent future conservators with potentially better methods from doing their work. The conservation process itself can sometimes reveal incredible secrets, offering a thrilling glimpse into the object's hidden history. During the restoration of a fire-damaged tapestry, conservators might discover areas where soot has preserved the original vibrancy of the dyes underneath, protected from centuries of light exposure. In other cases, when a tapestry is carefully removed from its lining, conservators have found fragments of earlier, discarded cartoons or even evidence of previous repairs, showing how these works were valued and maintained by generations long past. One of the most dramatic forms of rescue involves tapestries that have suffered catastrophic damage. There are stories of pieces pulled from flooded basements, carefully frozen to prevent mold growth until they can be treated, or of tapestries damaged in fires, where conservators face the heartbreaking task of painstakingly cleaning and reweaving tiny sections, thread by thread, to make the scene whole again. These heroic efforts underscore a profound and urgent truth. The preservation of medieval tapestries is not a luxury but a necessity. Each surviving piece is an irreplaceable repository of historical, artistic, and technical knowledge. They are primary source documents that offer insights no written chronicle can provide. The ongoing work requires not only immense skill and dedication, but also significant and sustained funding for research, training, and public education. Every stitch taken by a conservator, every dollar allocated to a climate control system, and every hour spent researching ancient dye techniques is an investment in our collective future. It is a promise that these magnificent woven chronicles, these whispers of wool and silk from a distant world, will continue to inspire, teach, and fill us with wonder for all the generations yet to come. We often picture these monumental tapestries as permanent fixtures, hanging in silent grandeur on the stone walls of a cathedral or a castle hall, but that static image couldn't be further from the truth. In the dynamic rhythm of medieval life, tapestries were living, mobile assets, constantly on the move to serve the ever-changing needs of their powerful owners. Their portability was one of their greatest strengths, transforming them from simple decorations into versatile tools for comfort, ceremony, and conquest. Imagine a lord's baggage train winding its way across the countryside. Alongside the carts of weapons, food, and clothing would be carefully rolled and packed tapestries, their precious threads protected in leather cases, ready to be unfurled to transform the next cold, impersonal stopping point into a familiar seat of power. Their most immediate and practical function was as a primary source of insulation. A medieval castle was a spectacularly drafty and damp place, its massive stone walls leaching heat from the air and radiating a perpetual chill. Hanging a large, heavy tapestry created a vital barrier against that cold, trapping body heat from the room and providing a layer of warmth that made vast, cavernous halls surprisingly habitable, especially during the long winter months. They also served as magnificent space dividers. The Great Hall of a castle was a multi-purpose room used for everything from sleeping servants to hosting feasts. By strategically hanging tapestries from rods or beams, these expansive areas could be quickly partitioned into more private, intimate chambers for the lord and his family, offering a semblance of privacy in a bustling, crowded environment. A tapestry could literally curtain off a sleeping area or create a secluded corner for confidential discussions, its thick wool muffling sound as effectively as it blocked drafts. But their use reached its most spectacular heights in the theater of power and diplomacy. For a major royal ceremony like a coronation, wedding, or the signing of a pivotal treaty, the setting had to be perfect. Tapestries were meticulously selected from a collection to create a specific narrative backdrop. A coronation might be staged against scenes of King Solomon's wise judgment, visually linking the new monarch to legendary wisdom and divine right. A wedding celebration could be held in a hall draped with tapestries depicting the allegorical marriage of virtues or the romantic tales of Tristan and Isolde, reinforcing the ideals of love and dynastic union. The most famous example of this diplomatic pageantry was the Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520, the epic summit meeting between King Henry VIII of England and King Francis I of France. Each monarch tried to outdo the other in a dazzling display of wealth, and tapestries were their ultimate weapons. They erected vast temporary palaces of fabric, their interiors lined with the most magnificent tapestries from their collections, many woven with threads of real gold and silver that glittered in the sunlight. These were not just decorations, they were unequivocal statements of national prestige, cultural sophistication, and overwhelming financial power, designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. This mobility also made them indispensable on military campaigns. A commanding nobleman would not endure the hardships of a cold, barren field tent when he could bring his comforts and symbols of authority with him. His campaign tent would be lined with tapestries, often depicting martial themes like the victories of Alexander the Great or St. George slaying the dragon. Inside this woven command center, he could plan battles surrounded by images of past triumphs and heroic virtue, a powerful psychological tool for both himself and the advisors who joined him. Furthermore, this practice of traveling with art turned any space into a portable theater of memory and identity. Wherever the lord went, he was surrounded by the same images that adorned his home castles, scenes of his lineage, his heraldic arms, his patron saints. This created a continuous, familiar environment that reinforced his identity and authority for himself and his retinue, no matter how far from home they ventured. The tapestry was not confined to a single wall. It was an integral, dynamic part of the rhythm of medieval life, a versatile and vital possession that moved with its owner to provide comfort, project power, and forever tell a story. The vibrant threads of a medieval tapestry did more than just depict a scene. They could weave an entire epic poem, a chivalric romance, or an ancient myth into a single, breathtaking visual field. For the educated nobility who commissioned them, these textiles were a form of visual poetry, a way to surround themselves with the stories that defined their culture and values. The most popular and revered literary works of the age provided an endless wellspring of material for tapestry designers, transforming the written and spoken word into a silent, yet profoundly eloquent spectacle. Imagine a lord's great hall where the walls themselves recounted the tragic love of Tristan and Isolde or the heroic quests of King Arthur's knights, turning the entire space into an immersive storybook for guests who could both see and discuss the tales unfolding around them. Among the most cherished sources were the Arthurian romances penned by poets like Chrétien de Troyes. His tales of Lancelot's devotion to Guinevere or Percival's quest for the Holy Grail were not just stories. They were blueprints for idealized behavior, models of chivalry, courtly love, and spiritual pursuit. A tapestry series based on these romances allowed a patron to literally cloak themselves in these virtues, presenting their own court as a modern-day Camelot. The weavers faced the creative challenge of condensing these complex, multi-layered narratives into a series of key scenes. They had to identify the most dramatic and iconic moments: the first meeting of the lovers, a pivotal joust, the glimpse of the Grail, and compose them in a way that would be instantly recognizable to a literate viewer. The tapestry became a visual summary of the story's heart, its core themes of honor, passion, and sacrifice shining through even without a single written word. Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, with its vibrant parade of medieval characters from the noble knight to the bawdy wife of Bath, offered a different kind of inspiration. While a full narrative adaptation was less common, the character types and satirical spirit of Chaucer's work undoubtedly influenced tapestry design. We see echoes of his pilgrims in the rich, detailed depictions of everyday life and the diverse social strata that appear in the borders and background scenes of many secular tapestries. The playful, sometimes mischievous drolleries in the margins, a fox preaching to chickens, a monkey cheating at dice channel the same earthy humor and social commentary that made Chaucer's work so enduringly popular. This connection shows that tapestries weren't only about lofty ideals. They also reflected the full, colorful spectrum of medieval life and storytelling, from the sacred to the profane. The process of adaptation from page to loom required immense creative interpretation. The artist who drew the initial cartoon and the weavers who followed it were not mere copyists. They were translators moving from one language to another. They might simplify a convoluted plotline to focus on its emotional climax, or combine several characters into one for visual clarity. They would also add their own visual flourishes, expanding on a brief textual description to create an entire ecosystem of symbolic plants and animals in a millefleur background, or designing lavish costumes that went far beyond the text to showcase contemporary fashion and immense wealth. Their goal was to capture the spirit and moral essence of the story, even if that meant taking artistic liberties with the exact letter of the text. The medium's constraints became a catalyst for innovation, forcing these artists to find new, purely visual ways to express complex literary ideas. This created a fascinating and dynamic interplay between the oral and the visual. In a time when reading was a private, silent act for a privileged few, storytelling was most often a communal, spoken experience. A tapestry hanging in a hall was the perfect catalyst for this. A visiting minstrel or a learned guest could use the images spread across the wall as a giant visual aid, pointing to different scenes as they narrated the story of the Trojan War or the adventures of Alexander the Great. The tapestry served as a memory palace made of wool, its scenes providing the structure around which the spoken word could weave its magic. For those who could not understand the Latin inscriptions sometimes woven into the borders, the images themselves told the story, making these literary classics accessible to a wider audience. The tapestry was not a replacement for the story, but a partner to it, a silent, stationary performer in the ongoing theater of medieval cultural life. This deep integration of image and word, of sight and sound, elevated these creations from the level of skilled craft to the realm of high art, proving that the loom could be as powerful a tool for storytelling as the poet's pen. Just as the finest wine is shaped by its unique terroir, the character of a medieval tapestry was deeply influenced by its place of origin. Across Europe, specific cities and regions emerged as powerhouse hubs of production, each developing a distinctive artistic fingerprint that made their work instantly recognizable to a knowledgeable patron. The story of tapestry weaving is in many ways a geographical one, a map of innovation and style that stretched from northern France deep into the heart of Flanders. To understand the full scope of this art form, we must take a tour of these legendary creative centers, starting with the city whose very name became a synonym for quality. In the north of France, the city of Arras rose to such prominence in the 14th century that its name, Arras, was used across Europe to refer to any tapestry of high quality, much like we might say champagne for sparkling wine today. The weavers of Arras were celebrated for their grand, ambitious compositions, often tackling complex historical narratives and deeply solemn religious themes. Their workshops produced vast cycles that told stories from the Bible or the lives of saints with a powerful, dramatic intensity, designed to inspire awe in the great halls of kings and the choirs of cathedrals. The success of Arras was no accident. It was strategically located at the crossroads of major trade routes, granting its merchants easy access to the finest English wool and the precious dyes that arrived from the Mediterranean and the East. This commercial advantage, combined with the generous patronage of the powerful dukes of Burgundy, who controlled the region, created a perfect environment for artistic excellence to flourish. For a time, to own an Arras was to own the very best the world had to offer. But the fortunes of cities could change dramatically in the tumultuous Middle Ages, and the story of Arras is a poignant example. In 1477, the French King Louis XI, seeking to crush a rebellion, laid a brutal siege to the city. The subsequent sack of Arras was catastrophic. Its population was dispersed, its economy shattered, and its celebrated weaving workshops were largely destroyed. This tragedy, however, became an opportunity for its rivals. As master weavers fled the violence, they carried their invaluable skills with them, seeding new centers of excellence elsewhere. This diaspora of talent was a crucial catalyst for the next chapter in tapestry's history, spreading technical knowledge and artistic ambition to neighboring cities that were ready to welcome them. One of the greatest beneficiaries was the city of Tournai, situated just across the modern-day border in Flanders, in what is now Belgium. Tournai became the new epicenter of tapestry production in the late 15th century, and it developed a style that was distinctly its own. If Arras was known for its grand narratives, Tournai became famous for its enchanting and intricate millefleur backgrounds. The term millefleur means thousand flowers, and it describes those mesmerizing tapestries where the main figures are set against a dense, flat field of countless blooming plants, each rendered with botanical precision. This wasn't just a decorative whim. It created a timeless, paradisiacal setting that was perfect for both secular romances, like the famous Lady and the Unicorn series, and sacred scenes, transforming any subject into a moment of idealized beauty suspended in an eternal spring. The weavers of Tournai mastered this style, and their work was sought after by royalty and clergy across the continent, their floral tapestries becoming some of the most coveted objects of the age. As the medieval period transitioned into the Renaissance, the mantle of leadership would once again be passed. the city of Brussels emerged as the new undisputed capital of tapestry weaving in the 16th century, pushing the art form to new heights of realism and technical virtuosity. Brussels weavers began to treat the loom like a painter treats a canvas, collaborating directly with famous artists to create incredibly detailed cartoons. They pioneered the use of finer wools and an abundance of silk to achieve astonishing effects of light, shadow, and texture, creating tapestries that rivaled oil paintings in their visual impact. Their specialization was often vast, complex narratives with numerous figures, woven with a clarity and sophistication that left all others in the shade. Meanwhile, Paris also maintained its own significant and respected workshops, often operating under the strict control of the royal court. Parisian tapestries were known for their elegance and their close connection to the intellectual and artistic currents of the French capital, frequently reflecting the latest trends in fashion and design favored by the monarchy. The rise and fall of these hubs were dictated by a fascinating mix of economics, politics, and pure geography. Access to the raw materials of the trade, high-quality wool from England, alum for dyeing from the Middle East, and silk from Italy was paramount. A city on a major river or trading route had a built-in advantage, but even more important was the steadying hand of powerful patronage. The continuous demand from a court like the Dukes of Burgundy or the Kings of France provided the financial stability workshops needed to invest in years-long projects and to experiment with new techniques. Political stability was another key factor. Periods of war or unrest could scatter a community of weavers in an instant, as happened with Arras, while peace and strong central authority allowed the craft to put down deep roots and truly thrive. This ever-shifting map of production, with its migrations of talent and competing regional styles, ensured that the art of tapestry was never static. It was a continuous conversation across borders, a beautiful competition between cities that drove innovation forward, each center learning from the others and striving to create something even more magnificent, leaving us with a rich and varied legacy that tells the story of all of Europe. To truly grasp the staggering value placed on these monumental works, we must step away from the loom and into the ledgers. The creation of a grand medieval tapestry was not merely an artistic endeavor, it was a colossal financial undertaking, an investment comparable to commissioning a private jet or a custom-built superyacht today. The final price tag was a sum of its exquisite parts, each one a significant expense in its own right. It began with the raw materials. The wool from thousands of sheep, while locally sourced, required extensive processing. The true luxury came from the imports. Silk threads traveled thousands of miles along the Silk Road from China and the Middle East, while the most vibrant dyes, like Kermes insects for scarlet and lapis lazuli for blue, were sourced from the Mediterranean and Central Asia, their journey adding immense cost at every stage. Then came the human capital. A single tapestry required a small army of highly skilled specialists, the artist who painted the detailed cartoon, the master weaver who oversaw the project, his team of journeymen and apprentices, and the dyers who possessed secret alchemical knowledge. This entire team would be paid, housed, and fed for years, sometimes even decades, for a single commission. When you factor in the cost of the massive looms, the workshop space, and the merchant middlemen who facilitated the trade, it becomes clear that only the very wealthiest individuals and institutions in Europe could even contemplate such a project. The historical records that have survived provide us with jaw-dropping examples that put this value into stark perspective. We know that in the 15th century, a high-quality tapestry from a renowned workshop like those in Arras or Tours could easily cost more than a knight's annual income. A knight was a member of the landed gentry, a professional warrior who maintained his own armor, horses, and a small retinue of men. His was a life of considerable privilege and expense. The fact that a single tapestry was valued higher than his entire year's earnings speaks volumes. For an even more dramatic comparison, consider that a large, elaborate tapestry series could be valued as highly as a small castle or a fully armed warship. These were not just decorations, they were capital assets, physical manifestations of liquid wealth transformed into a durable, beautiful, and mobile form. This exorbitant cost was precisely the point. For a duke or a king, owning such pieces was a direct and unambiguous display of their financial power, a way to visually humble rivals and impress allies by demonstrating a command of resources so complete they could afford to spend a fortune on something whose primary function was to be looked at. This flow of incredible value was made possible by sophisticated, far-reaching trade networks that functioned as the economic circulatory system of the tapestry world. The journey of a finished tapestry often began years before the first thread was spun, with the gathering of its components from across the known world. Merchant caravans and ships brought raw silk from Italy, which had itself been imported from the East. Spices and dyes arrived from ports in Alexandria and Constantinople, their origins in India and the Persian Gulf adding layers of middlemen and markups. Alum, the essential mordant needed to fix dyes, was a strategic commodity controlled by Italian merchants who sourced it from mines in Turkey. Once a tapestry was completed, it entered another stream of commerce. They were sold at great international fairs like those in Champagne, France, which acted as the medieval equivalent of a global trade summit. However, the most prestigious pieces rarely reached an open market. They were often commissioned directly by royalty or traded through diplomatic channels as gifts of state. A powerful duke might send a set of tapestries to a neighboring king as a pledge of alliance, a not-so-subtle display of his own wealth, and a calculated gesture of goodwill that came with an unspoken expectation of reciprocity. This movement of tapestries as diplomatic currency cemented their role not just as art, but as instruments of international relations. Given their immense and stable value, tapestries naturally evolved into a form of investment and a reliable store of wealth, much like gold bullion or prime real estate is today. In an era before modern banking systems, the ultra-wealthy needed ways to preserve and leverage their capital. A tapestry was a perfect vehicle for this. Its materials, wool, silk, and precious metals inherently held value. Its status as a unique masterpiece by a renowned workshop ensured its desirability remained high among the elite. Because of this, tapestries were frequently used as collateral for large loans. A king needing to finance a military campaign could pledge a set of tapestries to a wealthy merchant or a banking family in exchange for the vast sums of cash required to pay and equip an army. They were also central components of noble dowries. When a daughter of a great house married, her dowry was not just a payment to the groom's family. It was a transfer of her own wealth and security into the marriage. Including several magnificent tapestries in her dowry chest was a powerful statement of her family's status and provided her with tangible, valuable assets that remained her property. This financial utility reveals the dual nature of these artworks. They were simultaneously objects of breathtaking beauty and cold, hard capital, blurring the line between the gallery and the treasury, and forever securing their place as the ultimate symbol of wealth and stability in the uncertain world of the Middle Ages. In a world where identity was everything, a tapestry was far more than a beautiful object. It was a declaration of who you were, where you came from, and the legacy you intended to leave behind. For the medieval nobility, These monumental weavings became the ultimate canvas for personal and familial expression, a space where heraldry, lineage, and individual achievement were literally woven into the fabric of art itself. Imagine walking into a great hall and being surrounded by immense scenes where the central figures weren't just generic knights or elegant ladies, but were unmistakably the lord and lady of the castle themselves, their faces, their coats of arms, and their greatest triumphs immortalized in brilliant wool and silk. This was the power of the tapestry. It transformed a noble's residence into a personalized gallery of their own mythology, a constant visual reminder to themselves, their family, and every visitor of their exalted place in the social order. Heraldry was the universal language of this identity, a sophisticated system of visual symbols that acted like a medieval barcode, instantly communicating lineage, alliances, and titles. A coat of arms was not merely a decorative shield, it was a legal mark of ownership and a proud symbol of heritage. Weavers became masters at integrating these heraldic devices seamlessly into their compositions. They might be emblazoned on the banners carried into battle, on the caparisons draping the war horses, on the shields of the knights, or even subtly worked into the borders of the tapestry itself. A skilled viewer could read a tapestry's heraldry and know exactly who had commissioned it, who was being depicted, and what political alliances were being celebrated or asserted. This turned every tapestry into a personalized document, a visual charter of a family's right to rule and their network of power. A magnificent example of this is the Devonshire hunting tapestries, a series woven in the 15th century that depicts elaborate aristocratic hunting parties in lush, idealized landscapes. At first glance, they are vibrant scenes of a popular leisure activity, but look closer, and the entire narrative becomes a detailed and personalized record of a specific family's social world. The various participants in the hunt are all identified by their own unique heraldic badges and coats of arms, meticulously woven into their clothing and onto the trappings of their horses. This allows us to identify not just the probable patron but also his guests, friends, and allies who joined him on these expeditions. The tapestry is no longer a generic scene. It is a frozen moment in time, a guest list from a long-vanished weekend at a noble estate, preserved forever in thread. It celebrates community, friendship, and shared social ritual, all while reinforcing the patron's central role as the gracious host at the center of this elite world. Beyond recording social events, tapestries were frequently commissioned to mark and monumentalize the most significant moments in a dynasty's life, especially marriages. A wedding was the ultimate fusion of two lineages, and a tapestry was the perfect medium to celebrate and publicize this union. These marriage tapestries would ingeniously combine the heraldic arms of both the bride and groom's families, often quartered together on a single shield to symbolize the creation of a new, combined lineage. The central scenes might depict allegories of virtuous love, like the story of Tristan and Isolde, or more direct representations of the married couple themselves being blessed or presented to each other. For a noblewoman leaving her childhood home, such a tapestry was a powerful part of her identity, a constant and comforting reminder of her own prestigious bloodline, even as she entered her new husband's world. It was a document of the political alliance she represented and a hopeful narrative of the dynasty she was expected to found. This expression of identity also extended beyond the individual to encompass much broader cultural affiliations. The very style of a tapestry could signal a regional identity. The dense, flowery millefleur backgrounds of tapestries from Tournai, for instance, are instantly recognizable and would have been associated with the high artistic culture of the Burgundian Netherlands. The choice of subject matter could also reflect religious identity. A devout patron might fill his home with scenes from the lives of the saints, loudly proclaiming his orthodoxy and piety. In regions with strong local cults of particular saints, those figures would appear prominently, tying the family's identity to the spiritual identity of their lands. In this way, a tapestry wove together the personal, the familial, and the cultural, creating a multi-layered artifact that was both a deeply intimate possession and a public-facing monument to a whole way of life. It was this profound ability to speak to identity on every level that made these works so much more than wall coverings. They were the very fabric of a family's soul, woven to last for generations. Yet even the greatest artistic traditions must eventually adapt or fade, and the story of tapestry after the Middle Ages is one of remarkable transformation. The world that had given birth to these monumental weavings was itself changing dramatically. The Renaissance, with its revolutionary embrace of humanism, scientific perspective, and the individual artist genius, began to shift elite tastes away from the collective, symbolic language of tapestry and toward a new champion, the painted canvas. Why commission a vast, expensive woven scene that could take a team of artisans years to complete when a single painter could create a similarly grand illusion of space and drama on a stretched canvas in a fraction of the time? The oil painting offered something new, a breathtaking window into an idealized world, with perfect perspective, subtle shading, and portability that tapestries, for all their strengths, could not match. The very qualities that had made tapestries so vital, their durability, their portability, their insulating properties, became less important in the warmer, more permanent stone palaces of the Renaissance, where frescoed walls and large paintings became the preferred symbols of modern taste. This shift in artistic fashion was accelerated by a technological revolution, the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century. This might seem an unlikely villain in the story of tapestry's decline, but its impact was profound. For centuries, tapestries had served as a primary medium for mass storytelling, a way to disseminate religious narratives, historical chronicles, and moral allegories to a largely illiterate population. Now the printed word, and crucially the printed image in the form of woodcuts and engravings, could fulfill that role far more cheaply and quickly. The demand for woven narratives plummeted. Faced with this existential threat, the great tapestry workshops of Europe, particularly those in Brussels and Paris, did not simply close their doors. Instead, they adapted in a fascinating and, to some, controversial way. They began to treat the loom not as a storytelling device in its own right, but as a tool for replicating paintings. They started producing tapestries that were essentially woven copies of famous works by Renaissance masters like Raphael and later Baroque painters like Peter Paul Rubens. These pieces were technical marvels, achieving astonishing levels of detail and painterly effects through an ever-increasing number of fine threads and a vast color palette. But in the process, something of tapestry's unique soul, its graphic strength, its symbolic language, its inherent flatness, was often lost in the pursuit of becoming a mere imitation of another art form. This new direction did find glorious success in the Baroque era of the 17th century. The absolute monarchs of Europe, like Louis XIV of France, understood the power of art as propaganda on a colossal scale. For his magnificent palace at Versailles, tapestries were essential. They were still the only art form that could physically fill the cavernous walls of his Hall of Mirrors and the grand state apartments with color, warmth, and most importantly, images that glorified his reign. He established the Royal Gobelins manufactory in Paris, which employed armies of weavers to produce immense series depicting his military victories, his divine right to rule, and the economic prosperity of France under his command. Under the artistic direction of the painter Charles Lebrun, the Gobelins produced tapestries of unparalleled opulence and complexity, woven with unprecedented amounts of silk and gold and silver thread that shimmered in the candlelight. In this context, tapestry was revived not as a narrative medium for the masses, but as the ultimate luxury product for the 1%, a dazzling and exclusive tool for cementing the myth of the Sun King. By the 19th century, however, the pendulum had swung again. The Industrial Revolution had mechanized everything, including textile production, leading to a decline in craftsmanship and a glut of poorly made, soulless goods. In reaction to this, the arts and crafts movement emerged, led by the towering figure of William Morris in England. A designer, poet, and socialist thinker, Morris looked back to the Middle Ages with profound admiration. He saw in medieval tapestries not just beautiful objects, but evidence of a more humane and integrated system of production, where artisans took joy in their work and created art for everyday life. He sought nothing less than a full revival of these principles. He taught himself to weave, studying historical techniques on a loom he built himself, and went on to produce tapestries that consciously echoed the aesthetic of the late Middle Ages. His most famous work, The Woodpecker, is a perfect example, a beautiful flat pattern design with a symbolic animal set against a dense floral background, directly inspired by the millefleur tapestries of centuries past. For Morris, reviving this art was part of a larger social mission, a way to restore dignity to labor and beauty to the home in an increasingly industrialized and alienating world. This spirit of looking backward to move forward continues to inspire artists today. Contemporary creators are not simply replicating medieval tapestries. They are in a vibrant dialogue with them, using the ancient language of thread to speak about modern issues. Artists like the Canadian duo Kate Jackson and Anna Torma create massive, intricate textile works that incorporate traditional stitches and motifs to explore themes of memory, the body, and personal mythology. Others use the medium's historical association with power and narrative to critique contemporary politics, gender roles, and social structures. They might use humble, modern materials alongside traditional wool, or employ digital technology to aid in the design process, but the core act of building an image thread by thread remains the same. This ongoing conversation proves that the medieval tapestry was never a dead end. It was a beginning, a rich, complex, and durable form of expression that has been continually rediscovered, reinterpreted, and rewoven by each new generation that encounters its enduring power. For all the masterpieces that have survived, hanging proudly in museums around the world, there exists a ghostly counterpart, a collection of lost tapestries known only from written records, their splendors vanished into thin air. Medieval inventories from royal courts and noble estates are filled with tantalizing entries that read like a treasure map to a hidden hoard that no longer exists. We know, for instance, that King Henry VIII of England owned a staggering collection of over 2,000 tapestries, many of them depicting elaborate scenes from classical history and biblical lore that have simply disappeared from the historical record, likely lost to time, neglect, or the ravages of war. These phantom textiles haunt historians, their descriptions hinting at entire cycles of storytelling and schools of artistic design we can now only imagine. The loss feels particularly acute when we consider that many of these works were not just decorative but were primary historical documents, potentially offering new perspectives on famous events or capturing the likeness of long-vanished royalty. Their absence is a constant reminder of how fragile our connection to the past truly is, and that every tapestry we can see today is a survivor of a much larger, richer tapestry of art that has been frayed by the passage of centuries. Even the most famous surviving series are shrouded in questions of incompleteness, none more so than the beloved unicorn tapestries. The series we have today, housed at the cloisters in New York, consists of 7 panels that tell a coherent but enigmatic story: the hunt, capture, and mysterious resurrection of the mythical beast. Yet, many scholars passionately argue that the story feels incomplete, that there must have been at least one more panel, perhaps an introductory scene that set the stage for the allegorical drama. What would this missing piece have shown? Perhaps it depicted the unicorn in its pristine, wild state, establishing its purity before the hunt began. Or maybe it featured the patron and his lady, providing a crucial key to interpreting the entire cycle as a personal, rather than a universal, allegory. The way the existing panels are arranged and the narrative flow between them suggests a gap, a missing link in the chain that would make the symbolism even clearer. This isn't just an academic exercise, it's a genuine historical mystery. Without a full inventory or a contemporary description, we are left to piece together the story from fragments, and the possibility that a panel of unimaginable beauty and importance is still out there, waiting to be discovered in a dusty attic or a forgotten trunk, is a dream that fuels the imagination of art historians and treasure hunters alike. Beyond missing panels, the tapestries we do have are often filled with their own cryptic puzzles, woven in plain sight. The borders of these works are particularly fertile ground for hidden messages. While often filled with charming animals and flowers, these margins sometimes contain tiny, easily overlooked details that seem to serve as a weaver's signature or a workshop's mark. A small, woven monogram, a peculiar animal that appears in multiple works from the same city, or a specific, repeated floral motif might be the only clue we have to identifying the hands that created these masterpieces. The Bayeux tapestry, for all its fame, is a hotbed for this kind of speculation. Beyond the main narrative, the borders are filled with small, often bizarre scenes: a man with exposed genitals, a suggestive pairing of a cleric and a woman, strange hybrid creatures. For centuries, these have been dismissed as mere decorative drolleries, the medieval equivalent of cartoon margins, but modern scholars increasingly see them as a form of subversive commentary, perhaps inserted by Anglo-Saxon embroiderers who held a silent grudge against their Norman overlords. These tiny, stitched rebellions could be hidden jokes, critical asides, or even pagan symbols resisting the Christian narrative of the main story. Deciphering this hidden language is incredibly difficult, as the original cultural context is lost to us, but it transforms the act of viewing into a delightful game of historical detection. The quest to solve these mysteries is no longer confined to libraries and old documents. It has moved into the high-tech realm of the conservation laboratory. Modern science is providing us with a powerful new set of tools to peer through the centuries and see these tapestries in a completely new light. Infrared imaging, for example, can sometimes see through the top layer of thread to reveal the original cartoon drawings sketched beneath, showing us the artist's first thoughts and any changes made during the weaving process. This can tell us if a figure was added later or if a symbolic element was an afterthought. Even more revolutionary is the potential of DNA analysis. When conservators carefully clean these textiles, they can collect tiny particles of dust and debris trapped in the fibers for centuries. Within that dust can be microscopic fragments of skin cells or pollen, holding the DNA of the weavers who handled the wool or the environment in which the tapestry was first woven. Analyzing this genetic material could one day help us pinpoint the exact region where the sheep were raised that provided the wool, or even identify the specific workshop where the tapestry was created based on the unique biological footprint of its artisans. This blend of cutting-edge science and ancient craft is opening up a new chapter in art history, one where a single strand of thread can hold a world of hidden information. These ongoing investigations remind us that a medieval tapestry is not a closed book but an open case file. Every time we look at one, we are not just seeing a finished picture, we are witnessing a frozen moment in a long and complex history of creation, use, and interpretation. The enigmatic symbols, the lost panels, and the hidden signatures are not flaws in the narrative but invitations to look closer, to question, and to engage in a conversation across time. They blend the thrill of a detective story with the profound depth of history, ensuring that these ancient artworks never grow static but remain vibrant, living puzzles that continue to challenge and captivate us, proving that the greatest secrets are often those woven into the fabric of the beautiful and familiar. The journey of the medieval tapestry from the cold stone walls of castles to the bright, climate-controlled halls of modern museums is a story of rediscovery and reinvention. For centuries, many of these masterpieces were tucked away in ancestral homes or church treasuries, their significance fading from memory. It was the great museums of the 19th and 20th centuries that became their new patrons and protectors, recognizing them not as historical curiosities but as pivotal works of art. Institutions like the Musée de Cluny in Paris, dedicated to the Middle Ages, and the Cloisters in New York, a branch of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, provided these fragile giants with a permanent stage. At the Cloisters, the unicorn tapestries are displayed in a setting designed to evoke their original context, allowing visitors to be enveloped by their magic, to walk alongside the hunters, and to lose themselves in the thousand flower gardens. This museumification did more than just preserve the tapestries. It transformed public perception, elevating them to the status of high art and making them accessible to millions who might never set foot in a European castle, ensuring their stories reached a global audience. This renewed visibility inevitably sparked the imagination of contemporary storytellers who found in these woven narratives a deep well of inspiration. Author Tracy Chevalier, known for bringing art history to life, was so captivated by the mystery and beauty of the unicorn tapestries that she crafted an entire novel around them. Her book, The Lady and the Unicorn, imagines the human drama behind their creation, the artists, the patrons, the weavers, and their tangled web of desires and ambitions. She gives voice to the silent figures in the scenes, exploring the tensions between artistic vision, commercial demand, and personal passion in 15th century Paris. Similarly, the Bayeux Tapestry's continuous, graphic novel-like narrative has made it a frequent reference point in modern political satire and commentary. Cartoonists have reworked its familiar scenes to depict everything from modern electoral battles to international conflicts, using its ancient form to critique contemporary power struggles, proving that its language of conquest and propaganda remains as potent today as it was in the 11th century. It has even found a home in the digital age, becoming the subject of countless memes and online parodies, its images of oaths, ships, and battles repurposed for humor and social commentary, connecting with a new generation in a language it never could have anticipated. Museums continue to play a crucial role in fostering this connection, curating blockbuster exhibitions that frame these ancient textiles through a modern lens. Recent shows have moved beyond simply displaying the tapestries as static relics. They use innovative lighting, multimedia guides, and interactive displays to help visitors decode complex symbols, understand the weaving process, and appreciate the sheer scale of the undertaking. Exhibitions might place a medieval tapestry alongside a contemporary textile work, drawing direct lines between the past and present to show how the medium continues to evolve. These curated experiences are designed to demystify the artworks, breaking down barriers of time and technical knowledge. They answer the question on every visitor's mind: How did they make this? By showcasing the intricate cartoons, the raw dyed yarns, and even reconstructions of looms. Museums transform awe into understanding, allowing people to appreciate not just the final image but the immense human ingenuity and labor that went into its creation, deepening the emotional resonance of these works. This dialogue between past and present is most vibrant in the studios of contemporary artists, who are not merely replicating medieval techniques but are engaging in a profound conversation with them. They see the tapestry not as an antiquated craft, but as a powerful and relevant medium for exploring today's most pressing issues. Artists like the British duo Timorous Beasties create vast, subversive tapestries that recall the millefleur style, but replace the idyllic flora and fauna with modern urban landscapes, weeds, and insects, offering a gritty, ecological commentary on our relationship with nature. Others use the traditional language of heraldry and allegory to critique current social and political structures, weaving in symbols of corporate power, digital surveillance, or climate change alongside the traditional lions and unicorns. This work honors the past by utilizing its visual vocabulary and painstaking handcraft, but it twists that tradition to ask urgent, contemporary questions, proving that the loom can be as incisive a tool for social commentary as any paintbrush or camera. The influence even extends into the immersive worlds of video games and film, where designers draw on the rich visual language of tapestries to build fantasy worlds that feel both ancient and authentic. In games like The Witcher or Dragon Age, players might explore virtual castles whose walls are adorned with digital tapestries depicting the mythical histories of those worlds, adding layers of depth and backstory. Filmmakers use them to instantly establish a medieval setting, but also to visually reinforce themes. A tapestry depicting a heroic hunt might hang in the hall of a corrupt king, creating a powerful irony that sharpens the narrative. This cross-pollination of ideas shows that the core principles of medieval tapestry visual storytelling, symbolic depth, and the creation of an immersive environment are fundamentally aligned with the world-building goals of modern digital entertainment. The thread that connects a weaver in 15th century Tours nigh to a game designer in 21st century Los Angeles is this shared desire to create a complete, believable universe that captivates an audience, proving that these ancient artworks are not locked in the past but are actively feeding the imagination of our own time, their patterns rewoven into the very fabric of contemporary culture. Fortunately, you don't need to travel to a distant castle or a major metropolitan museum to begin your own exploration of these woven wonders. The digital age has flung open the doors to these treasures, putting them right at your fingertips. Some of the world's greatest institutions have invested in creating incredibly detailed, high-resolution digital archives of their tapestry collections. The Victoria and Albert Museum in London and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York have phenomenal online databases that are free to use. You can spend hours zooming in to a degree of detail that would be impossible even if you were standing right in front of the tapestry with a magnifying glass. You can see the individual stitches, the subtle blending of colors in a hachure technique, and the delicate expressions on faces that are often lost when viewing the work as a whole. It's a revolutionary way to study these pieces, allowing you to appreciate the mind-boggling skill of the weavers from the comfort of your own home, noticing a hidden rabbit in the millefleur or a tiny, mischievous face in the border that you would have otherwise missed. To build a richer context around the images you're seeing, there is a wealth of fantastic books and documentaries that can serve as your guide. Thomas P. Campbell's book, Tapestry in the Renaissance, Art and Magnificence, is a masterpiece of scholarship that is also incredibly engaging to read, full of dramatic stories about patrons and weavers. For a more general and beautifully illustrated overview, The History of Tapestry by Wendy Hefford is another excellent choice. On screen, look for documentaries from the BBC and PBS that often feature segments on famous tapestries like the Bayeux or the Unicorn series, with historians and curators pointing out key details and explaining their historical context. These resources act like a knowledgeable friend walking you through a museum, pointing out the secrets and stories you might not have spotted on your own, deepening your appreciation from mere admiration to true understanding. If you find yourself captivated by the physical craft itself, you might be surprised to discover that the ancient art of tapestry weaving is very much alive today. Across the globe, there is a vibrant community of contemporary artists and dedicated hobbyists who are keeping these techniques thriving. Many cities have weaving studios and guilds that offer beginner workshops where you can learn the very basics of working on a small loom. There's something profoundly connecting about handling wool and feeling the simple over-under rhythm of the weave, giving you a tiny glimpse into the immense patience and skill required to create a monumental tapestry. For a truly immersive experience, seek out historical reenactment groups and living history museums like those in Flanders or certain Renaissance fairs, where enthusiasts dressed in period clothing demonstrate spinning, dyeing with natural materials, and weaving on replica looms, passionately bringing the entire process to life before your eyes. This journey of discovery becomes even richer when shared with others. We encourage you to become an active part of this community of enthusiasts. After this video, take a moment to dive into one of those digital archives we mentioned. Find a tapestry that speaks to you. Maybe it's the haunting gaze of the captured unicorn or the chaotic energy of the Bayeux Tapestry's battle scenes. Then come back and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us which piece you looked at and what detail caught your eye. What story did you see woven into the threads? Your unique perspective might help someone else see something they hadn't noticed before. By sharing our observations and questions, we can build a living, breathing conversation around these ancient artworks, ensuring that their stories continue to be told and retold, not just by historians, but by all of us who are captivated by their enduring magic. What can these ancient, threadbare masterpieces possibly teach us in our age of instant digital creation and artificial intelligence? The legacy of medieval tapestries is far more than a historical footnote. It is a vibrant, living blueprint for creativity itself, offering timeless lessons that resonate with startling clarity in our modern world. At its heart, the creation of a great tapestry was never a solitary act of genius but a symphony of collaboration. It required the visionary who painted the cartoon, the alchemist who conjured colors from insects and plants, and the weavers whose hands knew the intimate language of the loom. This reminds us that the most enduring and magnificent creations are rarely born from a single mind. They are the product of a community of specialists, each bringing their unique skill to the table, their individual expertise woven together into something far greater than the sum of its parts. In an era that often celebrates the lone inventor or the singular artist, the tapestry stands as a powerful testament to the profound beauty and strength of collaborative work. Furthermore, these textiles are a masterclass in the power of visual storytelling. Long before film, graphic novels, or interactive media, medieval weavers were crafting complex, multi-layered narratives that could be understood by anyone, regardless of their literacy or language. They used every tool at their disposal: symbolism, color, composition, and sequential imagery to guide the viewer through epic tales of love, war, faith, and power. They understood that a story is not just told, it is shown, felt, and experienced. This fundamental principle is the bedrock of so much modern media. The immersive world building of a blockbuster video game, the intricate storyboards of an animated film, the user experience design of a compelling website, all of these are descendants of the Tapestry's approach to narrative. They prove that engaging an audience requires creating a rich, visual universe that they can step into and explore with their own eyes and imagination. The Tapestry's ingenious blend of pure art and practical function is another lesson that feels incredibly relevant today. These were not fragile paintings to be admired from a distance. They were daily companions that insulated drafty castles, divided vast rooms, and witnessed history unfold. Their beauty was woven directly into the fabric of everyday life. This seamless integration of the aesthetic and the utilitarian is a guiding light for contemporary design. We see it in the architect who designs a bridge that is both structurally sound and sculpturally breathtaking, in the fashion designer who creates clothing that is both wearable art and a personal statement, and in the product designer who makes a tool that is as delightful to hold as it is effective to use. The Tapestry teaches us that true creativity often flourishes at the intersection of purpose and beauty, challenging us to ask not just, is it beautiful? Or does it work, but can it be both? Perhaps the most poignant lesson for our fast-paced, disposable culture is the value these works place on patience, skill, and preserving heritage. A single tapestry could take a team of weavers several years to complete. This was not seen as a delay or an inefficiency. It was a necessary investment in creating something meant to last for generations. This stands in stark contrast to our world of rapid prototyping and planned obsolescence. The Tapestry asks us to slow down, to appreciate the profound skill acquired through a lifetime of dedication to a craft, and to consider the legacy of the objects we create. This reverence for preservation extends beyond the physical object to the cultural stories and techniques they carry. The ongoing efforts to conserve these textiles are a direct acknowledgement that they are irreplaceable vessels of human knowledge and expression, connecting us to the minds and hands of people who lived centuries ago. This incredible legacy is not confined to museums. It actively inspires a new generation of creators across countless fields. Contemporary textile artists like El Anatsui create monumental, tapestry-like installations from discarded bottle caps and copper wire, weaving narratives about consumption, history, and global exchange, directly channeling the tapestry's scale and storytelling power. Video game designers build vast digital worlds like those in The Witcher or Elden Ring, where every environment tells a story and every artifact holds a hidden meaning, creating a truly interactive, tapestry-like experience for the player. Even the slow fashion movement, with its emphasis on handmade, durable clothing and traditional techniques, draws from this same well of inspiration, advocating for a more thoughtful, sustainable, and beautiful way of living. Ultimately, the greatest lesson of the medieval tapestry is an invitation, a call to action for each of us. It encourages us to look more deeply at the world around us and to recognize that hidden stories are woven into the fabric of our everyday lives, waiting to be discovered. It asks us to appreciate the immense patience and skill behind the handmade, whether it's a loaf of bread, a piece of pottery, or a piece of code. And most importantly, it inspires us to become weavers of our own stories. To approach our own creative acts, however small, with greater intention and care, to choose our materials thoughtfully, to collaborate generously, and to weave our personal narratives, our families, and our communities together with purpose and beauty, creating a rich and enduring legacy that will, in its own way, speak to the centuries to come. As we bring our exploration to a close, it's clear that these magnificent medieval tapestries are so much more than just threads and dyes arranged on a loom. They are whispering galleries of history, each one a complex language of symbol and story, a testament to the incredible collaboration between artisan and patron, and a bridge connecting us to the hearts and minds of people who lived centuries ago. They challenge us to look beyond the surface, to see the world not just for what it is, but for the deeper meanings and connections that are woven into the very fabric of our existence, waiting for a curious eye to uncover them. This journey through history and artistry reminds us of the profound power of storytelling in all its forms. Just as the medieval viewer found guidance, comfort, and wonder in these woven narratives, we too are surrounded by stories in the books we read, the films we watch, and the art we create. These tapestries encourage us to be more active participants in that story, to seek out the hidden symbols in our own world, and to appreciate the incredible skill and patience behind the handmade objects that enrich our lives. They are a powerful call to preserve not just these ancient treasures, but the traditions of craftsmanship, the value of collaborative creation, and the timeless human urge to make meaning from the world around us. If this journey into the world of medieval tapestries has sparked your curiosity, we would love to hear from you. What was the most surprising thing you learned? Do you have a favorite tapestry or a detail that captured your imagination? Share your thoughts and discoveries in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and build a community of enthusiasts who appreciate the wonders of history, art, and the stories that connect us all across time. And if you want to join us for more adventures into the past, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating corners of history. Thank you so much for watching and for investing your time in uncovering these beautiful secrets with us. May your own life be rich with stories, and may you always find the extraordinary woven into the threads of the everyday.